Here we are, everybody. Believe it or not, it's been another couple of days, and it's time once again for I Didn't Sign Up for This. Kara, you with us?
I am. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good. So I have a topic that's weighing on my mind tonight that I really want to get off my chest.
Okay, well, let's dig in.
I'm going to sum it up in one word, and that word is no.
Okay.
Now, I'm the type of person that I don't take no for an answer on a lot of things. Okay. I mean, obviously, like everyone else, I pick my battles. But I think that sometimes in our lives, we say no before we even think through yes being a possibility. And I've seen it in business, and I've seen it in spontaneity and relationships, you name it. And it really bugs me because saying no immediately closes the door on opportunities that might make your life better or might make your work easier. So I want to talk about it. What do you think?
Yeah, that sounds great to me. Let's dig in.
Okay, so from a business perspective, I've been thinking a lot about the corporate environment and how we're all on the same team. We all are working towards the ultimate goal in business, and that is to make sales, make money, go home happy. Yet there are so many departments and so many projects and so many scenarios where no seems to be the go-to answer. And I know that when I was doing a lot of project management stuff previously, and I was working with different departments in the corporate environment, we would come up with concepts and projects, and we would get on these calls with whether it was IT or marketing or whatever department it was, it doesn't even really matter. But the personality and the concept and the structure would always come back. You almost get a no, and then you have to work your way back and fight your way back to a yes every time. So I started thinking about that today and how that impedes people. And I look at clients that I've worked with from a professional level in the corporate environment, who that is their go-to on everything in their life, and they work their way back. That is such an obstacle and such a barrier.
It is. You have this type of person who just kind of says no and then says, let's just say no and then ask questions later. It's kind of like ready, fire, aim sort of situation. And I think it's common, or at very least more common, the bigger the client, right? Mm-hmm. When I'm dealing with a little 15-man shop doing $40, $50, $100,000 a week in sales, and they're not a small business by any means. I think by anyone's barometer in terms of what the business can do and is performing, they tend to be very, very nimble. It is a little catamaran sailboat. And then I get over into the Fortune 500 crowd, and they tend to be like a giant oil tanker, mm-hmm. which is a good thing in the sense that it affords the luxury of the little catamaran sailboat to be able to basically sail rings around the giant Fortune 500 company, because you've got so many people involved and invested in every decision at every level. There is no one person who either can or will just take responsibility for an initiative and move forward. Everything goes to committee, because you've got to get somebody to write the checks to pay for that. Somebody else has to gauge return on investment after the project has been implemented. And I think the bigger you get, the further away you get from the head of a power structure. The most successful businesses that I've ever seen on a dollar per dollar basis have been the small, nimble companies, where basically run by a benevolent dictator, as opposed to a bunch of people who want to feel really invested. And understand too that no is a very powerful word. If I don't have the authority to say yes, I've got to kick it upstairs, ask my boss and his boss and her boss, and I've got to get a committee together and make decisions and do, forecasting and all of that stuff. And so anytime you ask me to implement a project, if I'm sitting in a Fortune 500 middle management, upper middle management position, the weak word is yes. But to exercise my power and to feel like I am in charge of this whole thing, I can just say no. And it doesn't go anywhere. And I think that's such a culture endemic to all businesses, certainly American businesses, that I have ever seen above a given size.
Okay, fair enough. So let's talk about the power in saying yes to something. Because I get that. I've seen that. And no closes the door and I have the authority. But what if we put our egos aside and looked at the opportunity? And I'm not talking about the person who has everything on their plate and they just can't say no. And then it becomes a time management issue and they're wearing themselves thin and they're burning themselves out. That's not the audience that I want to attract with this conversation. I want to talk about the people who their immediate response is no, and what that does and how many doors that potentially closes. Number one, you have to think through it. You have to be intelligent. You have to be able to make good business decisions. But you're in the role that you're in today because you have proven that you can make those good business decisions. So,
Right.
Is it instinctual that we say no? Is it a protection?
I think it is a part of the system.
Okay.
Simply because a yes carries a tremendous amount of risk.
Okay.
So much so that people will not say yes without checking 2, 3, 4, 5 levels up the food chain.
Okay.
A no carries almost zero risk because honestly, the chances of someone in that corporate environment, say I've got someone at I don't know, CSR or something in a big company, right? Mm-hmm. And they just got off the phone and they have this amazing epiphany. You know what, if we were to do blah, 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 and then this, and then go around that way, that would profoundly change things for the better around here. Make life a lot easier and make us all more efficient, more effective. We could stop hiring so many people. Turnover would drop and the skies would open and the hand of God would reach down and touch us on the forehead or whatever. So that CSR, by virtue of the place that person is coming from, goes obviously to someone in a management level and says, hey, here's the idea. Now that's your first potential no. Because the person at the management level just does not want to engage in new initiatives. You know, I just want to be comfortable. I just want to, don't rock the boat. Just keep things rolling, put in my time, get my bonus, go on vacation, do it again next year. And that is the underlying driver for, I dare say, most people. And I can prove that because it's got to be the underlying driver for most people, because if it wasn't, then most people would be working for themselves, running their own companies. And they're not. They're just not. Okay? And so now you have your first level of no at that management level. So as a CSR with your brilliant idea, you go and you absolutely sell it to the manager. Then the manager has got to take it, because it's the corporate hierarchy environment, in my experience, and it's pretty extensive experience, is such that there's a chain of command, meaning I hand the idea to you, you massage the idea and hand it to the person above you, they massage it, hand it to the person above them, and so on until finally you might run into someone who can actually make a decision. And so if you were in a situation where you had a much more flat structure, CSR goes to the manager person, the manager goes right to the VP of whatever, of initiative change, culture change, improving life, whatever it is, and says, hey, I'd like to introduce you to, this is Jenny, she's CSR. She had this really amazing idea and I want to bounce it off of you, right? Then you're a nimble organization, you're getting things done. But because in big organizations you don't have that, you have that pyramid structure, level after level after level after level, slowly climbing your way to the top until you finally bump into somebody who says, hey, that's within my purview to make a decision. And so I'll make a decision, yes. But to get that yes, you've got to go through level after level after level of someone whose power word is no. They can't help you. They can't get it done. They can't take it to the next level. They can't even see the vision. But boy, they can definitely crush your dreams and just take it away from you at whatever level you happen to be. It's a cultural problem.
Absolutely. But I also think it affects and impacts business. I mean, look at Blockbuster. Look at the success and the boom and the prestige that Blockbuster had. And they went into a merger with another company, and it took so long that it was just exhausting, and the outcome was not positive, and some of the executive leadership left. And it was right at the time where internet moved in and moved us away from going to rent a movie. But I remember growing up, we'd go to Blockbuster and we'd go grab dinner, and we'd come home and we'd watch a movie, a VHS movie, just to date myself a little bit. But because we lived in an environment and I wasn't in their board meetings, and I can't say this, but I would bet that no was the go-to answer, and a lot of the innovation that they had the opportunity to capture.
Right.
And because they had that opportunity and they said no because of the red tape, because it's hard, because I just want my bonus, they're gone.
You're right.
They were absorbed, I believe, by Viacom.
They were. And there's still half a dozen stores around the country. From one on every corner, think Starbucks, to there's a half a dozen in the country that still operate on whatever level.
They could have cornered the market. And so when that competition, that innovative competition, those people that said, I don't want to work for a company that says no anymore. I want to move into a company that says yes. And I want to capture the internet. And I want to do all of these things. And it phased it out. So there's a lesson in that.
There is a lesson in that. And I promise you, hundreds and hundreds of people inside that organization came to them and said, you know what? VHS is probably not the end of the world. VHS is probably not going to carry the day here pretty quickly. CD is not, or DVD is not going to carry the day here pretty quickly. There's this cool new thing. But you got to understand, when that whole thing started falling apart, it would take 7-8 hours to download a movie, and it was very expensive. But the writing was on the wall. Everyone could see, except for the people who they wanted to cut your legs off at the knee, because that was their power word. And that is something that was a problem with the culture in Blockbuster. It was that their culture was not one of open nimbleness, change, what's the new thing, what's the best thing. The ideal structure that I've ever seen, I worked with a company who shall remain nameless. Essentially what we did was we went in an effort to change their culture around, and we created a position that was just the chief innovative officer, CIO. And all they did was hear ideas. And those ideas were formatted in the form of business plans, right? Everybody could submit the business plan for their particular purview in the organization. And that business plan would be a description of, hey, here's my job, and here's what I do for a living, and here's, how I get paid. Here's the value that I bring. And if I could change anything, I would change this, and I would change that, and I would make this work, right? And then you had this one person who was a conduit directly to the decision makers. And that person's whole job, 40, 50, 60 hours a week, to thumb through these business plans and interview people about their vision for improving their little sphere, their little part of the grand organization. And it worked. The reason why, it worked. It really worked. Mm-hmm. The trick, the thing that they overcame was this hierarchical order. You no longer walked up the staircase to present your idea or your concept. Okay, to go you one better, they actually paid bonuses based on ideas that were accepted and implemented. They were an innovative company. And here's a crazy idea. You get what you pay for. Meaning, if you want cutting edge innovation, simplification, streamline of processes, all of that stuff that makes a big organization really work, you got to pay for it. Right? It's not enough to pat somebody on the back and buy them a dozen donuts, right? You have got to throw it at them in the form of a bonus or a pay raise or whatever. And that's what this organization did. And I mean, it was just crazy, wildly effective. Nobody walks up the staircase anymore. There's one of those little air tubes like they have at the bank, right? And you hit the button and the vacuum turns on and the idea goes straight to the top of the world. Mm-hmm. And we dig through the idea and decide if it's viable or not. And if it is, we're going downstairs to talk to that person who came up with the idea to get some clarification. And of course, the overwhelming majority of the ideas were garbage, and they wound up in the garbage. But enough of the ideas were so bloody brilliant that they wound up changing the direction of that company profoundly and made a lot of money. That's the culture, though. That's a cultural thing, and it's top down. You've got to come in. If your culture is Armani suits and silk ties, you dang well better be wearing one tomorrow morning and every morning that you go to work, because you can't just require other people to do it or even ask other people to do it. And so it's a cultural thing, and it's top down. By implementing this chief innovation officer, by implementing that one person and creating that direct line to the decision maker, cutting out all of the people who it really behooves them to keep their head down and just say no, you allowed the ideas that really work to get to the top.
I can see that. And that's key to the success and the longevity of a business. But what about the success and longevity of your life? So if we're saying no at work all the time, and it's really, if I say no, I close the store, I have less work to do. There's a disconnect there. Are you carrying that behavior home with you to where you're implementing it and you're saying no to your life? So life's knocking at your door and you're opening it, saying no, grabbing the pizza from the pizza guy and closing the door and going back to the TV?
Sure you are.
Is that what happens?
Of course.
Because that's no life.
Yeah, I agree. But that goes back to, our underlying mantra, change your paradigms, change your life. It's very easy to say no. How many people have you known that I've had this experience literally, no exaggeration, at least 100 times in my life, having to do with things like parties, church events, and ball games. Just those three. Right? Do you want to go to the Valentine's party? Nah, that thing's always stupid. It's always kind of pathetic, and it's just like, it's not ever very good, and there's never anybody there, and I'm going to be alone the rest of my life anyway, and there's no hope for me, right?
I hate chocolate.
Exactly. Chocolate is disgusting if you really think about it. Okay, and so now next step is Tim swoops in and kind of starts laying on the persuasion. All right, let's think about that. What are the chances of meeting some significant other sitting here at home in your pajamas and slippers?
0.
Because, hey, you never know. Maybe it's the pizza guy. I don't know. Maybe you tear that door open and you meet the love of your life. Chances are you don't, though. Chances are you give him a crappy tip and you slam the door and say no to him as well. Right? Because that's your pattern.
Agreed.
So you come in and you observe the situation, you introspect, which I'm sure that's not a verb, but I use it as a verb and have for years, and I'm not going to stop now.
All right.
You introspect and look at yourself and start looking at the upside of staying home versus the upside of going to the party. And if there is any upside to going to the party, then you owe it to yourself to go. Time and time again, parties, church events, which are actually just a whole lot of fun if you give it a chance, and ball games, basketball, football, whatever. I convince people to go with me or with whomever, and they have an absolute blast, right? Mm-hmm. I can remember my daughter Lacey just going, I don't want to have to go. I don't want to have to leave the house. I don't want to have to do this. I don't want to have to do that. And I'm just like, okay, boo, well, what are the advantages of staying home? And we would weigh it out. She'd see the pros and cons. I'd use that Socratic methodology of just asking question after question after question until the ultimate answer was, yeah, you're crazy not to go. And she would go and then come back and we'd sit up and drink hot chocolate for another hour and she'd tell me how great it was. This thing, again, that she absolutely did not want to participate in. She just said no. And she didn't do it forever, right? I mean, this is the girl who was intercontinental traveling filmmaker person, right?
Right.
And so obviously she got over it. But there were times back in the day where it happened. And it's not just her. So many people that I know. And they go to the ball game or they go to the church function or they go to the little party. And they come home going, that was fantastic. Either that or they come home and we sit up for an hour drinking hot chocolate talking about how awful it was. And we laugh twice as hard as if it'd been a great event. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I'm reminded of the movie Yes Man. Have you seen that with Jim Carrey? Yes Man?
Yes.
Perfect example. Other than, he gets in a lot of hot water. I'm not going to spoil the movie, right? But it's the power of saying yes first. I try to do that in my life with the kids, with the employees, with the consultants, with the people, whomever I'm talking with, right? They come to me and they say, somebody comes to me, Bob comes to me and says, man, can I have a 40% raise? And my answer is, yes, you absolutely can. As soon as we figure out what you're going to do to bring at least 60, 70% more value to your position, then, half of that or better, I'm going to hand to you. The answer is always yes. It's always yes, and then I hand it back to you, right? Yes, I want to retire young. Can I? Yes, absolutely you can. Let's talk about what you're going to have to do between now and then, and or what you're going to have to give up in order to make that work. How are you going to do that? Let's talk about it. I'm sure we can figure out a way. We're bright people. Can I have your job? Yes, you absolutely can have my job, right? All we got to do is train you how to do my job to the point that I don't need to come in here every day and do any of it. And that frees me up to expand the company or open a different division or get into a sideline business within the same umbrella structure of the company or whatever. Yes, the answer is always yes. But I think that's stuff that I learned from that client back in 99, as well as running companies, raising kids and consulting and whatever. And you always say, yeah, that sounds fantastic. How are you going to do that? Let's talk about how that's going to work. What I do find, though, as often as not, is there are a lot of people who want something, are willing to actually ask for it, and that's where it stops, right? Mm-hmm. They stop right after the question. Can I have that? Yes, you certainly can. As soon as you prove to me you're worthy of it. How are you going to do that? Oh, never mind.
Never mind. I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. Well, yeah, because there's work required when you say yes.
That's right.
And so does it come back to avoiding work, avoiding the change? If there's work required, there's no work required in saying no. You close the door and you walk away.
That is
and
correct.
Then the next door opens. But here's the kicker in all that. That door may not be knocked on again.
That's right.
You may not get an opportunity to say yes at a later time. It's always a good time to go for something and say yes to something.
That's right.
It always is.
It is.
If everything that we have in life is a lesson or a valued experience, we even learn from our mistakes and from our opportunities. So if you say yes and it doesn't go well, it's still a learning experience. If you say no, you're stagnant. You sit in the same place.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Well, and the word yes requires, if not work, it requires sincere consideration at very least.
I can see that.
Because it's very easy to just stop and say, no. And I don't have to consider anything else, right? I have not enough information to understand the proposition, not enough information to actually make a good decision. But let me stop you right there, Bob. The answer is no. Go back to your cube, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the problem is, here's the problem. If what Bob was offering is truly groundbreaking and you don't know because you didn't consider it, Bob's not going back to his cube. He might go back to his cube for a few months or a couple of years, but every night between about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the evening when things settle down and 2 in the morning, Bob's working on that idea and Bob's going to take you out. Bob is Netflix. I'm sorry to say. You need to listen to what Bob has to say. And maybe he's not. Usually he's not. But say yes, invite him in, sit him down, hear what the man has to say. Because there is a chance Bob's Netflix and you're Blockbuster and you think you're on top of the world, but that world is crumbling under your feet.
Well, and the innovation that we need to survive in business, yes is required. So without the word yes, you will not be able to evolve with the ever-changing times. I could list 5 companies that are gone now that, just off the top of my head, that did not change and did not evolve into society. Maybe they said no to social media, or they said no to the internet, or, we laugh at that now because the internet and social media, it's what people live by.
Right.
But there are companies that close their doors because they didn't want to change. So I guess yes actually evolves into a change, and whatever that looks like.
Right.
And I would challenge anybody to say yes. You know, do you know who Shonda Rhimes is?
Shonda Rhimes. That sounds really familiar. Remind me.
Well, she owns Thursday Night on ABC. She is a writer and a TV producer. And there are all these big shows that I think it's predominantly ABC. She actually did a TED Talk not too long ago where she talked about how she said yes to everything for a year.
Okay.
And how that changed her life, whether it was in her business. The more she said yes, the more work she had to put into it. But also she said yes at home when her kids needed time or they needed her attention. She reminded herself that she had put out the goal in her life to say yes to everything. So when her children needed her time, she stopped what she was doing and said yes to them. And she's fairly successful. It's actually a really good TED Talk, but it talks about the power of saying yes in her way. So not only could she balance her family and balance success, but saying yes brought in that positive energy, and it allowed her to create abundance. It allowed her to take her life and build more and more and more. And I mean, if you watch any award show, it's usually her shows that are getting the awards. And she's a really good writer. She's a really good television producer, and she balances it. But she chose herself, and she chose the word yes over the word no. So if you think about that, when you say no to the people that need you for whatever reason, Mom, I want to go to the park. No, I can't right now. Or Dad, I want to go, hit balls at the batting cages. No, I can't right now. What are you actually doing? You're closing out an opportunity to spend time with your children or spend time with those that love you. Or, honey, we need to spend more time together. No, I can't. I'm too busy. So I'm going to forego a date night. And then all of a sudden you don't have the communication and relationship that you need that is really the most important, because at some point it was the most important.
Well, but don't you think that's also just a lack of clarity?
What do you mean?
I mean, the most important thing that I am doing right now, the thing that I will not compromise on at all, is I'm breathing. I'm sitting here and I'm breathing. And so if I do not have clarity about that being the single most important action that I'm engaged in right now, and it's absurd because your body will pass out, right? It won't allow you to not breathe. But just bear with me for the sake of example.
Okay.
If I could get away from being absolutely crystal clear on the fact that I need to breathe, then it would be far easier for me to continue to do something else. I continue to talk without inhaling to the point that I forget to breathe and I pass out or drop dead or whatever, right?
Uh-huh.
It's about clarity. So if you are busy, too busy to go to the park with your kids, too busy to go, work on your boys' baseball game, or too busy to take that significant other on the date night that you've promised each other you would just never miss, if at all possible. What are you busy with exactly? And where does that fall in your own personal hierarchy of needs? Because if I am so busy, I don't even know what. If I'm so busy keeping up with the yard or, doing something for the neighborhood or participating in a civic group or whatever, that I'm willing to forego my children or forego my significant other and their needs, at some point, you got to open up that little workbook to your personal hierarchy of needs and see where in that list comes my immortal beloved, my darling children, versus, making sure that the PTA shows up on time next week.
So it's all about prioritization, really, gaining that clarity and prioritization and saying, this is more important to me. So if the little ladies at church call me and they need me to do something, but I have a family thing that night and my priority is my family over these cute little ladies at church that need my help, I'm going to say no to them. And by saying no to them, I'm saying yes to what's more important. Good point. I love that. I love it. I believe in that. I believe that it's true. I don't mean when you're going through a drive-thru and they ask if you want to supersize, say yes to that every time. That doesn't end well.
Right.
But so prioritization absolutely plays into that in your personal life. Great point.
Because if you're not clear, and it's not just personal, it's business as well. If you're not clear on the mission you don't. Okay, so I had a really interesting chat. I'll bore you for a second.
Okay.
Had a really interesting conversation with my son, Gator, the Navigator. Gator's short for Navigator. I had a really interesting conversation with his baseball coach about a week ago. And here's what he told me. He said, if I see any of you parents coaching your child from the sideline, I will bite my tongue and not say a word. But if your son reacts to your coaching, I will sit him down for the rest of the game.
Nice.
And then he goes on to explain himself. He's like, I am out here. I am charged with one task. I got one job, win ball games. That's it. And so if you are coaching from the sidelines, you notice that your son is too far forward in the batter's box. Okay? Mm-hmm. Because you don't realize I've got him laying down a sacrifice bunt. And I'm not about to go to you in the stands and say, hey, Bob, I got your boy laying down a sacrifice bunt on this next pitch. So just shut up. It's okay. I'm not going to give that away to the opposing team, right? Mm-hmm. I've got a strategy to win a ball game. I need to move a guy from first to second. There are no outs. If I lay down a sacrifice bunt, I can achieve that right here, right now. Your kid, whether you notice or not, is the best bunter on the team. He's forward in the box because I said, move up in the box and lay down a bunt. Back in the box, your bunt's likely to be a foul, okay? Mm-hmm. And so what happens is that coach has a preconceived, highly prioritized, he's very clear on his mission. He knows what mission critical is. And if you do not know what your mission critical is, then you will get distracted and you will say yes to the wrong things and no to the right things.
Got it.
You're not clear.
Clarity and prioritization, and then saying yes to the right things. That's the key to greater happiness, both from an innovation perspective at work and obviously better home life.
Yes.
I like it. I think it's key. I think it's something we need to talk about. I think we say no way too often, and I have heard more success stories on saying yes to opportunities and things that arise than I've ever heard of, protection and conservation and saying no.
Right. Well, it goes back to the Colin Powell line. Colin Powell, who was the national security advisor to President Bush, and he was asked about some of the decisions that he made in the war in Iraq. And his response was really powerful. It was, more has been lost to indecision than has ever been lost to a bad decision. No is nothing more than indecision in a decision's clothing.
Oh, I love that.
Right? Mm-hmm. You don't have enough information to decide because you have not carefully considered, and you're running late for lunch with the girls. And I don't want to sit here and talk to this customer service representative, lowly, whatever. However you're kidding yourself that you're important, because you're not. You're a cog in the machine, but unwilling to hear that person out or set up a different time to hear the idea, you just say no. It looks like a decision, but it's not. It's just you not having enough information to make a decision.
Well, and it's a fear response. It's
a protectionist response, because you cannot really go wrong in the near term by just shooting everything down. Shoot everything down. Now, in the long term, you're blockbuster. But in the short term, you can get to lunch with the girls and you're not likely to look stupid, at least not this quarter. You'll probably even get your bonus this year.
Yeah, you can probably float by on that for a very long time. I've seen a lot of people do it, and you will eventually hit a wall. You will hit a wall, and there may or may not be coming back from that. And then you look at potentially having to go a different path or having to go a different way or starting all over. I get that we need to protect ourselves. And, if somebody comes up and says, hey, you want to do some drugs? I would recommend saying no. Most of the time. However, when you look at you have to sit back and look at the opportunity. So I guess the point that I want to make is you don't immediately jump to no. Maybe you don't jump to yes either, but you need to think through it and make a conscious decision before you immediately close it off with no. I don't like getting no for an answer. If I'm told no, I'll try another approach, and I'll try a way around it until the answer becomes yes. And that actually may be a different path because it took a little bit of strategy and thinking through it. And that's not a bad thing. It's okay to be cautious. It's okay to think through and organize the pros and cons, or look at the opportunities that may or may not arise. But if you immediately say no, you're closing out any future growth, any future opportunity with whatever you're referring to.
You're absolutely right. That's why we always say yes with a caveat.
I love that. That's a good takeaway. Mm-hmm.
Always say yeah. Immediately, just say yes. Yes. I just need to understand it better. Yes. I just need to know where the value is going to come from. Yes. I just need to know how that increase in productivity can translate to more money for you. It's always yes. I just need to understand. By saying yes, I need to understand, I'll repeat myself. You also are saying, let's consider it. You're saying, well, let's take a look at that and figure out how it'll work. But by saying yes, that person goes home to husband or wife or significant other or whatever and says, yeah, they said yes to my idea at work today. Now they feel a lot better about working there. Ultimately, is it a yes? It might be, if we can figure out how to make it work and really see where the value is. But if we can't, we left the caveat in there. Yes, as long as X.
I like it. And I believe that the more you say yes and the more you open doors to opportunity, the more you will believe in yourself. And you'll be able to put more faith in your decisions. And it will lead to more opportunities every time. You have to stretch yourself. You have to be able to stretch outside of your comfort zone, and you have to be able to evolve. We do that in business, and we do that just on a human basic level. There's an evolution to life. Otherwise, we would all be the same that we were in our 20s, with the same perceptions and the same goals and the same ideas. And not that they're all bad, but there's an evolution of thought and an evolution of emotion that comes with maturity. And that only comes through experience. And the more you say yes, the more experience you will bring into your life. So take the time, weigh it out, determine if it's the right thing for you or not, and then move forward with it. That's my biggest takeaway from this.
Right. I wholeheartedly agree. Just say yes.
Every time.
Every time. You can't throw out a blanket yes, right? I mean, here's the thing. You mentioned earlier, I'm not suggesting you say yes to drugs. Somebody comes up to me, right? Mm-hmm. Tim, man, I was going through my old, college yearbook, and I found a couple tabs of acid. You should do it with me. Right?
No.
Well, the answer, my friend, is yes. As long as I'm not going to lose my job, I'm not going to lose my family, I'm not going to get arrested, and I have all these caveats, right? I might have a dozen qualifiers. If you can overcome these dozen objections, which I'll be amazed if you can, then the answer is absolutely yes. Let's give it a try. Let's see what happens. Now, I got to admit, I've never done acid, right? And so nobody's ever overcome my qualifiers. Nobody's ever cleared that hurdle just yet. But the answer is always yes. The answer is always yes, as long as, absolutely, yes. As long as it doesn't hurt the customer. Yes, as long as it shows more bottom line productivity or top line growth, bottom line growth for the company. Yes, as long as you can show me how we're going to clear these 2 or 3 or 5 or dozen hurdles. And if we can clear those hurdles, then let's implement your idea. Even if it's doing acid, let's implement. People love their job. They feel respected. They feel good about what they do because they feel like they're being heard. And then it's back on them. They have to clear the hurdles. or certainly push for some answers from other people to clear the hurdles. They feel heard, they feel understood. If they can't clear the hurdles, and it actually, this is going to sound terrible, but actually it's a pretty good way to, kind of get that guy out of your way who's coming up with the really idiotic ideas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's face it, man, we've all been there. If you've ever managed people, there's that one guy on the team who's just like, we need to have Raincoat Fridays, right? Everybody wears a raincoat and nothing else. Yes, Bob.
As long
yes,
as it
we
rains.
should. As long as we can do it without getting arrested, without getting sued, and I'll just go through all of the dangers. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to get back to you. I'll get a proposal. Put it on paper. Make a proposal. I'll consider it. Right?
Uh-huh.
Well, he can't figure out how to make a proposal not to get sued or not to get arrested because it's a buffoonish idea. But I always hand it back to the buffoon or the genius or somewhere in between. Yes, here are the things I see with that. If we can clear these 6 hurdles, then let's implement. And if it's an idiotic idea, they can't clear the hurdles. And man, I tell you what, if they can clear the hurdles, we really need to look at Raincoat Fridays because that might be a good idea. If you can clear my hurdles, I'm like, wow, I just did not think of it like that. Man, let's talk. What are your other ideas? If you could actually get around those problems, I want to know what your other ideas might be.
Well, and that leads to the opportunity to work together as a team and build on other people's ideas and allow for creativity. So perhaps saying yes ultimately leads to creativity not before realized, or not realized before, I guess. How do I want to say that?
Ooh, do this. Say, it leads to creativity heretofore unknown.
Ooh, that's fancy.
That is fancy. I like that. It will lead to creativity heretofore unknown.
Heretofore unknown. So, ultimately, there's magic within the word yes. There's power in the word yes. And I think that is something that we need to do more of. So I am going to challenge myself to say yes more when opportunities arise, because I think that is something that needs to be explored. It's an opportunity for new experiences and new growth. Richard Branson said, if someone offers you an amazing opportunity and you're not sure you can do it, say yes and then learn how to do it later. And I would say he's fairly successful. That's an interesting take on a man who owns so many companies and is so successful, but his go-to is yes, and I'm going to figure this out. And I believe in the ability to build on that creativity and to really drive your goals to fruition.
Absolutely. Always say yes, but never an unqualified yes.
Agreed.
Because if you will simply always say yes and then qualify those yeses, then the only thing you've really committed to doing is further consideration on whatever it is. And you owe it to yourself to further consider everything anyway, right? Do the work. It's going to take a little longer to read somebody's idea or their proposal. I got to tell you, if it's a crappy idea, chances are the person that it's coming from is not going to go to the time and trouble to articulate themselves in written form, i.e. a proposal anyway. And so, yes, with certain qualifications, always susses out the pretender. That person who truly believes in what they're doing, and they've got a really good idea and they know it. It's up to them to articulate it, and they will.
It's their opportunity.
That's right. This is your opportunity to move up, to be noticed, to make more money, to start a new company, to whatever you're doing. Line extensions of products. It could apply to virtually anything. But if you just say yes with qualifications, everybody knows you as the go-to get them done yes person. If you want something to get done, you go to this person. And you just hand it back to them and say, look, let's work on this together. Give me a proposal. Help me understand it. I've had numerous interactions with people over the years. I remember one more recent wherein I'm working with a client. The client has a vendor with whom he has had a long-standing relationship. And the vendor is trying to get some coding done. It's a computer thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's trying to get some database coding done. And the vendor is coming in a very heavy-handed fashion such that the client would virtually always say yes to whatever it was, even if he had to take money from other areas of the company or forced some suffering on different divisions, because he always said yes to this guy, an unqualified yes.
Okay.
And so I was brought in just to have someone to stand up to the heavy-handed vendor.
Wow.
And give a qualified yes. And I told that guy, I remember the phone conversation very well, right before he hung up on me. I told him, look, I want to say yes. I just need to understand what the value is. And I realize I'm comparing you to other vendors who I'm sure don't do nearly as good a work. You doing better work leads to more productivity, bottom line, more jobs for my employees, more expansion, growth, all these good things that are going to help me and the employees of this company. How? Just explain it to me, man. I've got the pen in hand. I'm just ready to sign the RFP. Just tell me why I should. And he couldn't do it.
Wow.
He just couldn't do it. And so I said no, and that relationship ended, long-standing relationship. And he was angry.
Oh, I'm sure.
But I wanted to buy. I wanted to say yes. It seemed like a much simpler solution. But man, when what you're charging is literally 700-800% above what I can get it for somewhere else, and you can't explain to me the difference between what you're selling and what that guy's selling for 15% the price, I'm going to go the other direction. You better figure out how to say what you're saying.
Absolutely.
And so the qualified yes is a very powerful tool.
I love it. How do you qualify it in your personal life? How do you qualify the yes in your personal life? Same way?
Yes, exact same way. Any question. You know, Gator asked me the other day if we could join there's this monthly fee baseball camp thing. It's not really a camp. It's like a training center. Mm-hmm. And they charge a monthly fee. And he said, I'd really like to join that. Can we join that? Will you pay the, couple $100 a month for me to join that? I said, yes, I will. If you can tell me what difference it's going to make in your baseball game, what difference it's going to make in your personal life, your school life, how it's going to help you, how it's going to build you up. Tell me how it's going to help you. And if you can tell me how it's going to help you, then the answer, of course, is yes. Start with a yes and then qualify it. Right now, we have not agreed upon that course of action because he's telling me, about this unlimited access to baseball and batting cages and, trainings and films and coaches and what have you. My response to him is you're in school 8 hours a day and then you're at practice 2 or 3 hours a day, 4 hours a day if it's a ball game. And that's going to go on for the next couple of months at least. So let's revisit the issue when you actually have time to take advantage of the training. And that's where we left it for the moment. And so we'll revisit it. Can I do it now? Yes. As soon as I understand how it's going to help you, what the investment is going to return. What's the upside? Because I'm glad. I want him to be the best baseball player on the planet. I'm glad to invest in that, as long as I can know what my return on investment is, just like anyone else. So you think in terms, personal life, business life, any life. You got to think to yourself when being queried, that sounds naughty.
Whoa. Yes.
If you've ever been queried, there was this one time in Tijuana when if you have ever been asked to do absolutely anything, your first response is to say to yourself, what's the return on investment? If you can actually provide what you are proposing, what is the return on investment? And that's how you determine what your qualifiers are. So you say yes. And what's my return on investment exactly?
Well, and that also gives you your prioritization.
That's correct. It gets you clear on what your priorities are.
Yeah, I believe in that. I believe that I think you're right. I think it's key to understand what you are going to get back versus your level of effort with everything. And I think making your life a priority is number one. I truly believe that in order to live your life and be happy with the decisions that you make, the most important thing you can do is say yes to yourself.
Excellent. And I agree, as long as you can show yourself a return on investment for the decision you're saying yes to.
Fair enough.
All right. Excellent. Well, we probably should wrap it on up. Unless you have anything else.
Nope. Great discussion as always. Thanks for letting me vent a little bit about the word no. I feel much better now. And I love the points that you made about return on investment. So great conversation.
Very good. Well, let's do this again in another couple of days.
Okay. Sounds great.
And until then, as always, dream your life.
And live your dreams.
Very good. Talk to you next time.
Bye-bye.